Hello, everyone, and welcome to those of you joining us live and those of you joining us in the future. My name is Kimberly, and I would like to begin by thanking each one of you for joining us today to listen to our virtual conversation with Jane Wolfe for Burl, journalism giant and medical trailblazer. I would like to begin by telling you a little bit about the Country Bookshop. It was founded by two women in 1953, and the store has had several longtime owners over the years. And in 2010, when the bookshop's doors were in closing, the Pilot newspaper bought the store. The Pilot newspaper has been named—
Kimberly,
Yes.
something is going wrong. It's recording like two different conversations.
Okay, tell me about this.
I don't know what was happening, but your voice was coming in and out. And then it was saying something about two women started something in 1953.
Yes, that's the bookstore.
Oh, okay. Oh, well,
Okay.
that's all I heard. I didn't hear anything about a bookstore.
Well, let me just start over and hopefully it will work. Better.
Okay. I don't know what your face froze. I mean, your picture froze, but that's okay. But the recording I was only getting tiny bits of it.
How is your internet connection?
I think it's good.
Okay, mine looks good as well. Hopefully that was just a blip.
Hopefully.
So I will try again.
Okay. What should I do if it's working? I hate to interrupt you like that.
Just keep going, because sometimes the recording will pull it through.
Okay.
And it can be an internet blip.
Okay.
Unless it's something egregious that goes for like 2 sentences, then we'll just repeat
Okay.
what we said.
Okay.
All right, well, wonderful. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us now live, or if you're watching this in the future, for the Country Bookshop conversation with author Jane Wolfe for Burl, journalism giant and medical trailblazer. My name is Kimberly, and I want to begin by thanking you all for joining us and tell you a little bit about the Country Bookshop. The Country Bookshop was founded by two women in 1953, and the store has had several longtime owners over the years. And in 2010, when the bookshop's doors were in danger of closing, the Pilot newspaper bought the store. The Pilot newspaper has been named the best community newspaper in the country 5 times, 3 years in a row over the last few years, and I think in the late teens, like 2016, 17, and 18. And from this perch, it is an extra pleasure to explore Burl Osborne today with his biographer, Jane Wolfe. The Country Bookshop is part of our town for one reason and one reason only: because you choose to shop with us. We hope that you are proud to shop with us, whether it is because you enjoy experiences like meeting authors in person or exploring books in depth through conversations like this. Or maybe you'd like to support us because you are proud of the work we do getting books in kids' hands across more in our surrounding counties. Or maybe just like having a place to walk in and discover books and take your family when they visit. We thank you for finding the Country Bookshop to be of value to our town, and we appreciate that you acknowledge our value to the community by buying your books with us. I would like to introduce Jane Wolfe before we speak. Jane is the author of 3 previous books: The Murchisons, The Rise and Fall of a Texas Dynasty, published by St. Martin's Press; Blood Rich, When Oil, Billions, High Fashion, and Royal Intimacies Are Not Enough, published by Little Brown. And she's also a freelance writer for several publications, including the New York Times, Town and Country magazine. She lived in Dallas from 1980, when Burl first got there, until 2019, and now resides in the city where she was born, Columbus, Ohio, where her family for many years owned the Columbus Dispatch. So welcome, Jane. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kimberly. It's nice to be on with you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, I'll tell you a lot about the book. So it's a great rags to riches story. It's about a man named Burl Osborne, who was born in a coal camp in really poor county in Kentucky, southeastern Kentucky. and rose to the highest rank. Well, first at the Associated Press, where he became managing editor after starting in the bottom bureau, and then at the Dallas Morning News, where he became publisher. Very short. Also won the war against the Dallas of the paper. It's a great medical story as well, because he was one of the first kidney home dialysis patients in the world. He was one of only 12 people in the beginning when he was getting home dialysis on a really, really primitive machine. He was one of the very few that were able to survive kidney disease because they were on dialysis. And then a couple of years later, the machine didn't work so well. He had problems with it, and he was one of the first kidney transplants in the world. And that was in 1966. So the whole time that he was working his way up the ladder at the Dallas Morning News and also at the Associated Press, he was battling kidney disease and not sure if he was going to live the next day. And so I think that really, I think his disease caused him to work extra hard and be more than the average person, have more than the average person determination to succeed.
It's so true. Well, it's a wonderful book. And I was wondering, the first story I wanted to ask you to tell before we could talk about it, but is the "What Do You Say to a Naked Lady" story.
Yes. Well, I don't remember all the details of it, but the picture in the book, Kimberly, you can tell the story, because
well,
enough time has passed that I forgot.
It's only a footnote in the book, but I think it's so provocative because it also gives, I forgot what year it is, but Burl is one of several reporters interviewing a naked woman who has a feather boa and a floppy hat on and nothing else. And his question to the woman is, "Are you cold?" As all the other reporters cannot figure out how to speak to her, he just cut straight to her humanity. And as you go through his whole life, what comes through is his ability to talk directly to a person and give them full attention. And it comes through and I was wondering if you could talk to that, just how this came
absolutely
as a reporter, or as a leader, or in all these situations. His
well, he had this uncanny ability to well, first when he walked to call attention, be focused on him. 5'5", I think it was more like 5'3", but he wrote on his driver's license that he was 5'5", so but I'm 5'3", and when I spoke with him, it seemed like we were at eye level. I mean, the same height, but in any case, he had the aura and of somebody taller, and people that had only spoken with him on the phone and had never met him in person always said, "I thought him much taller," because he just had this presence and this way about him. He was in command. People stopped to listen to what he said. Now how he got that, or what person that kind of aura, I don't know, but he had it, and a lot of women were attracted to him. He's not what you would call really good looking. You get a picture of him, you would say, "Oh my gosh, what a heartthrob," but women found him very attractive, and that's because he was so interested in them and what they had to say. He wasn't looking over their shoulder. He wasn't just interested in good looking women. He liked interesting, smart women. And well, he was everyone, everything. And so that made him interesting. And did have a way of talking to you, making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Some people have that ability, and I'm not sure how they do it, but he did.
He really did. You talked about him being a pioneer for kidneys, the first home dialysis transplant. And didn't he get 2 transplants?
Yes, he did have 2 transplants. The first one was in 1966. And that was, I think he was only the 130th person to get a kidney transplant in the world. The next one came much later when he was, I think in his late 40s, early 50s, he had the second transplant. And that was still remarkable for many reasons. And I talk about that in the book, but it was not quite as new. I mean, there were more being done, maybe a few thousand a year instead of just a couple hundred. So it was not quite the big story that the first one was.
It's amazing to read throughout the book. It's almost like these two, and the title really says it, journalism giant and medical trailblazer, but it's almost two parallel stories of his medical personal life, which he does talk about in articles and speeches, and then simultaneously his career. But because you write the book so well in very AP style, and the only place when he gets to Dallas, a Kentucky guy in the competing newspaper talks about, don't underestimate this guy. He's the longest living transplant survivor in the world. He's going to stick to it. But I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit about if the kidney transplants and how that might have affected maybe his clarity of purpose or his determination at all.
How the kidney transplant affected him and how he lived his life. Okay, yes, well, please. Okay. I think the kidney transplant went really well, and the kidney that been his mother's kidney, her second, she had two kidneys, obviously, and she gave one to Burl. So he had one good kidney, but that was all, but that's enough to survive. And I think after he got the transplant, he was so grateful to be alive and to be doing well that he worked extra hard to sort of, I guess, so he wouldn't feel guilty about having this great opportunity. But then throughout his life, he never knew. I mean, the kidney could have stopped functioning at any point. The kidney could have, his body could have rejected the kidney at any point. And so people said to me that I interviewed for the book that he often said, today could be my last day on earth. I'm going to make the best of it. And to him, it was winning, competing in newspaper, being in the newspaper war and competing for the Associated Press against the UPI. And so I think it spurred him on. I mean, we all wish that he had not had to suffer through kidney disease, but I've wondered if he hadn't had kidney disease, would he have done as well in his work, in his day-to-day work? Would he have had that determination and that drive that he did?
I wonder as well. And I think his doctor, Peter Ivanovich, that relationship was something that I enjoyed observing throughout his biography.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yes, Peter Ivanovich, Dr. Ivanovich and Burl met when Burl first started on, in Spokane, Washington, when Burl first started on dialysis. And Peter was like a cheerleader for Burl. He said, try to go ahead and live your life as you would, because dialysis wasn't meant to just keep people alive. It was meant for people to live their lives fully and continue to live their lives as if they weren't sick and as if they weren't on dialysis. And so Dr. Ivanovich was really impressed with Burl from day one, because Burl, even though he was doing dialysis in the middle of the night, during the day, he would go to the AP and work really hard. He came to really like Burl, and Burl really liked Dr. Ivanovich. And so when it came time to possibly get a kidney transplant, I think something like 4 out of 5 doctors that Burl asked about getting the kidney transplant, 4 out of 5 said, do not do it. You'll either die during the surgery, or the body will reject the kidney, and it's a total waste of your time. Don't do it. Well, Dr. Ivanovich said, do it. It's worth doing. And if it doesn't work, you can always go back to dialysis. And Burl trusted Ivanovich, the one doctor that said, go ahead and do it. And Ivanovich was ultimately right. The kidney lasted for 25 years.
It's true. And I love that they maintain their friendship forever. In the pictures that you include, because when I first read the book, I actually listened to it the first time. So I did not have the benefit of the pictures. And in here you have a picture of Betty and Jonathan and Burl and also Dr. Ivanovich.
Yes.
And when you talk about his funeral a little bit, it's Peter who can't speak at his celebration. And
Right.
I
He was most broken up about losing Burl. Yes. I don't know if it was the most, he showed his emotion more than anybody that day at the service.
And I think it's fascinating because it is the two of them, that friendship and that the fact of Burl's life and what he did with that life, what that said to say, well, this is what can happen when you save a life. This is what this does. And
yes, exactly.
It's fascinating. Well, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, similar to Burl's parallel with kidney and transplant technology, really going from one thing to completely another. The AP during those years when Burl started as a cub reporter and then moved to the AP bureaus, and as he moved about and rose up, can you talk about what the AP was at that time, what it meant, and how Burl's movement throughout the company it really exemplified,
really related to that. Yes,
the whole industry.
I mean, the AP had been around for a while, but when Burl joined, he started in the smallest bureau that the AP had, which was in Bluefield, West Virginia, and he was a one-man bureau, so he got the lowest ranking bureau, but he quickly showed himself to be a good writer and reporter and was promoted very quickly, first to Charleston and then to Spokane, Washington. Then from there, he went to Denver and then to Louisville and then to Columbus and then to Washington and ultimately to New York. He did all of that. He made those 8 stops in 20 years, which was a very fast rise. Other people can be in one bureau their whole lives and never really, I mean, hopefully if they want to move up, they are promoted, but a lot of times they aren't. And so Burl was an exceptional case. And I think he was really good. This is something else that's very interesting. He not only was a good writer and reporter, he did that job very well, but he was also a good manager. And so as he rose up the ladder and had bigger and better jobs, his focus sort of changed. He became more of a management person, but he still kept his thumb on the news and what was happening, and he was still involved in the news. But as he was a manager, he would go around from bureau, from newspaper to newspaper, people that subscribed to the AP, and he would talk with the newspaper owners, and he was really good at that and really good at paying attention to what they needed and what they wanted for their papers and then delivering that. So he was a success within a very successful organization.
And it's interesting as you talk about his dedication to the member owners, how that manifests itself in this also business company competition that was going on between UPI and the AP at that same time.
Yeah, right. Those two were competing fiercely to get their stories in those papers, whatever bureau it was around the country. And so Burl he would open the paper in the morning. For instance, the Columbus Dispatch, he would open that paper and he would look and he would circle how many AP stories were in the Dispatch and how many UPI stories were in it. And he didn't necessarily get mad or angry if there were if there were more UPI stories, but he sure preferred it when there were more AP stories. If there was a UPI story, he would ask the AP reporter, why didn't we have this? why didn't they buy our story or take our story instead of UPIs? So you had to explain yourself.
It's fascinating to me because you talk about him going to see the newspapers and individually and finding the answers to those questions and really developing that relationship with the community. And then when he leaves the Associated Press and goes to the Dallas Morning News, he's in another fierce combat for readers, the Dallas Times Herald, and he goes straight to the community aspect there as well as a way to compete.
Yes, he did. He studied the survey done about what readers want, and this was in it was like 1979 or 80, shortly before he came to the morning news. And it showed, and it was a long, detailed survey, and it showed a study that showed exactly what Dallas readers wanted and expected, and in the advertisements and also in stories. And Burl studied that and really got to know the community through that study, and then really focused like a laser on delivering that kind of story and that kind of delivering what the community wanted. And the Times Herald, of course, was trying to do the thing. They were both trying to, win over readers, but Burl did it more effectively.
It's in the foreword. It talks about how it's a book about, to quote the foreword, Drescher. I'm sorry, not Drescher.
Deckard, yes, Bob Deckard.
Deckard.
Yes.
So this is a book about ideas that define our nation and are the foundation for fairness and common decency among people of all walks of life. And I was wondering if we could talk to a few of those that stood out to me: freedom of speech, integrity in the newsroom, and attribution. And if you could talk with attribution, where
Burl insisted on attribution throughout the newspaper. He did not like the idea that some papers in the Times Herald had anonymous quotes, or just a lot of quotes that, not even quotes, but just information that was not attributed to anyone. And people would wonder, well, who is saying this? Is this the Dallas Times Herald saying this? Or is this just the reporter saying this? And so it was confusing to a lot of people. Burl said, we're always going to attribute. And so if there was more than one paragraph that a consecutive paragraph, the didn't have an attribution, he would complain about it. He would say, I don't care, because reporters complained and said it takes out the flow of the story. It makes writing so much more turgid and clumpy and choppy. And Burl said, I don't care. We're about accuracy. That's what matters most here. And that's first and foremost what we're going to attain. And he did. And I mean, then the paper was really respected for being accurate. Maybe sometimes a little boring, but accurate. Yes. That has disappeared. I mean, in newspaper generally.
I think it's so important. And I love that you're so clear about how that was just a core tenet of what he brought to the newsroom and a value that he maintained.
Yes.
And it kind of fits in with, because that by virtue of what it is, it makes each article have integrity. When you have attribution, it has the honesty and integrity that's there. But he also brought that kind of integrity to the business structure in the newsroom there. And what are some of the things he did there?
Well, he just insisted that his reporters not only be accurate but fair, and not attack people that really had done nothing wrong. He did not like attack journalism. He thought it was just it was not sustainable. For one thing, people were not going to allow. I mean, they're not going to read a paper for long. They just want So, I mean, yes, there was a place for attacking people that, people in high places that did something wrong, then yes, those people could be attacked, but not in a salacious manner, not in an angry and sort of personal manner. It should be done with the facts, and the news had to be truthful and fair as well as accurate.
And you opened up the book with, do you have the book? I was wondering if you might read
Yes.
I could guess it's this, in 1984, his contribution, it's the very first page talking about a free press.
The very first page. Oh,
Yes.
yes. Okay. Let's see. Let me get there. Okay. You want me to read that whole passage there?
Please.
Okay. In 1984, as his contribution to the 75th anniversary project of the Society of Professional Journalists, Burl addressed the topic, quote, "What a free press means to America," end of quote, with these words: "May they continue to inspire and encourage journalists the world over." So here are his words: "A free press is important to America only if freedom itself is important. Next to life itself, no value in our culture has been so cherished as freedom. No society has long preserved its freedom without preserving the free exchange of thought. No better prism than the press has yet been devised to communicate the competition of ideas, even unpopular ones, necessary to a democracy. That is why the press is important, not because journalists are special people, but because America is a special country. It's free, and a free press helps to keep it that way."
I think it's so special throughout this book, what you've gathered, because it's not only the timeline of what he did, but also because, especially in his later years, he spoke so widely and he wrote reflecting on things. And I think it really allows for a more spherical view of the man, because you include a lot of things in here so we can know what Burl was thinking and what his views were and why he was so able to galvanize people around him and under his leadership. And
he had very strong principles and morals. I mean, he believed strongly in doing the right thing. So even when it wasn't something that had to do with the newspaper, just something in life in general, he was felt that way. He was a strong advocate for doing the right thing.
Have people, before we get to how this book came to be, I'm wondering, as this book is, we were speaking before we started, you've toured around Texas and in Ohio. Are people who did not know Burl responding to this, the leadership and the integrity that he held as a person?
Yes, I think they are, because even though they didn't know him personally or had never heard the name Burl Osborne before, they know about Associated Press, and they know Dallas Morning News, one of the nation's newspapers. And so they know that these two institutions, he was running both of them. And because of his position, I think they think this is a story that is interesting to people anywhere. I mean, anywhere across the country. It's not just where he was. It's not just in New York and Dallas, but in North Carolina and Ohio and Illinois and California and everywhere.
I think we have a lot to learn from these leaders who we are now losing. But yes. I'm curious. Well, you cannot really know Burl without knowing Betty Osborne, who I am a huge fan of, and
his widow.
Yes, and I'm wondering how this book came about. How did you start on this project?
Well, I had written 2 books, and it just happened to be about Texas families. And Betty read those books. And so she knew me, and she knew that those books had done well. And she said, and one day I ran into her, and she said, "Would you be interested in writing a book Burl. And I thought about it for about a second. And then I said, yes, I would love to write a book about Burl. And the more I thought about it, and so I wanted to do it for all sorts of reasons. But one of the reasons was I had come to the Dallas Morning News from Ohio in 1981, which after Burl had arrived in Dallas. And the newspaper between the News and the Herald was at its height right then. And it was a really exciting place to be. And I thought, what a great book to tell the story of that newspaper war and how that was won and how all the different ways that Burl managed to win it. And I thought it's also a great medical story. It's also, I love newspapering, anything to do with newspapers. So it had a lot of appeal to me. And Betty, of course, you know, being his widow, loved him very much and wanted his life to be chronicled.
What was it like when you were there at this peak moment in Burl's career in Dallas, walking into that newsroom with him at the helm?
It was very exciting. It was really exciting. I mean, and people were rushing around. It was like, you know, an old movie newspapering, you know, like back in the 20s or 30s, where reporters are running in and out of the building and racing to story, tapped out on the typewriter, and in this case on computer screens. And and our bosses were, I mean, our editors were saying to us, you know, you better get the story right and you better get it first. And there was a lot of pressure to do really well. I was given the beat, I mean, the newspaper beat of Highland Park, which is a part of Dallas that's a really sort of upper middle class residential area. I thought, oh gosh, there can't be much of I mean, it's just a suburban area. It can't be that exciting. But because those were the readers that both papers were trying to capture, we were doing a lot of stories about Highland Park in both papers. And so I was getting all these stories on the front page that I've kind of wondered later whether they all really to be there, or it's just because we knew Highland Park residents were reading them and loving them. But yeah, I mean, it was the Dallas Morning News was opening bureaus across the world. The Herald was doing the same thing, and it was just like it was very exciting, and I can hardly even put it into words anymore. That's how different it was, what we see today, or what was there before that, before the war.
What an exciting time, and to be in Dallas at that moment in time at the paper, you know, this combination of a silo of a moment in time and to then reflect on that and the man who was championing it all.
Yes.
Had to be it's fascinating to hear about. How many people did you interview for the book?
I interviewed, I think, about 100. And I name a lot of them in the end of the book. I mean, in the acknowledgments, but I don't name. A few people didn't want to be quoted, or you know, that I spoke to some people just on background. They gave me information for the book without my quoting them because they just would rather not. You know, some people are nervous about being quoted or even really talking on the record. But for the most part, everybody did speak on the record.
Well, I mean, it comes together as a completely spherical story, as I said earlier. And I think it's one of these books that as book clubs explore it, I think it's so wonderful to read and to understand one of our leaders, but also to take these ideas that he stood for, this freedom of speech, the integrity of the newsroom, and the attribution, and also just being one human, putting one foot in front of the other towards these ideas, and what an effect one human can have. And I think there's a lot to talk about as people read this book around those topics specifically, and also whether it's in the newsroom pioneering that, or in a medical way, you just do it. You just say, okay, we will just do it.
Right.
And I want to
He had a
thank.
lot of courage, and Burl was a risk taker. I mean, he had a lot of risk in his life, big risks and little risks. And I thought, I wonder why that is that he did that. I mean, I guess it's because he knew he thought his life could be cut short at any moment, and he was going to live life to the fullest. I don't think he did things the easy way. A lot of times he did what he thought would get the most, that his life would be the most rewarding and challenging and fulfilling.
Other than working for Burl or seeing him socially, so it sounds like you started the book after he died. So were you able to have a lot of conversations with him, or?
Well, I did not have a lot of conversations. I was a city desk news years when I worked, I was on the city desk during the newspaper war. I then left to write a book. And then I came back as society editor in the early 90s. And at that time, I would see Burl and Betty at parties in Dallas. So we would say hello and, just make small talk at parties, but never, I didn't really have any big conversations with him. I've thought now, why didn't I ask him this? And why didn't I wish I had engaged him more, but I mean, I was a lowly reporter and he was the executive editor and then publisher. So I didn't really feel like it was that easy to just go up and start a conversation with him.
I enjoy how he knew how to use star power to really make a point. And you talked about a party that he and Betty threw near the end of the book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, he decided he was having this big party. I think it was AP executives, I believe. And so he thought, since they were coming from around the country, it would be interesting to have a handful. I think there were 20 or 25 celebrities in Dallas. I mean, it was people like Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and the mayor of Dallas, and Van Cliburn, the pianist from Fort Worth, and I don't know, a couple of other business executives. And when the party began, people looked around and they saw all these big stars. I mean, like the big names, the bold-faced types from around Dallas. And they said, Burl, how did you get all these people here? And he said, I invited them. I mean, it just was a natural thing. It was not so fetched for him to pick up the phone and call these different people. Well, the guests loved it because it was just, there was a star, like a table at the ball, and it was a huge hit, and it was written about not only in Dallas, but I think in a New York Society column covered it as well.
Well, I really appreciate you pulling together this book, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us in North Carolina about it. My grandfather does make an appearance in here as Mr. North Carolina, so there is a true North Carolina connection.
Yes, he does.
Spoke at Burl's funeral, and I think that it's really, when we think about the AP and newspapers at that time, what a small community it was.
Very small.
All of these leaders and friends and supporting each other and fighting for these ideas in communities, but also supporting each other with First Amendment and free press, and really taking it to the next level. So I really appreciate you shining a light on Burl. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimberly, very much for your interest in the book. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the question.
Well, of course. And so for all of you watching this or listening to this, if you have not gotten the book, There's a link where you can purchase it from the Country Bookshop, or the book is also available on audio, which I thoroughly enjoyed through our Libro FM audio, and I will also have a link to that. So thank you all, and Jane, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kimberly. I loved it. Bye-bye.